Welcome to the Wandering Tangent Podcast. I'm BJ, with me is Gary. There is no Jeff this week. Jeff's taking a week off, or not a week, an episode? Whatever. So, while Jeff's not here, the nerds are coming out in force, and we are going to talk about Warhammer 40,000, Angels of Death, Origins, Kill Command. Or, in all likelihood, probably Warhammer, should probably specify what, we're going to talk about the 40k in general, I suppose.
Yes. All 40,000 of the Warhammers.
And
And how they get used by the Angels of Death. All right. So
I guess we should establish a baseline of our Warhammeriness. So I'll go first, because I am the less Warhammery. I generally dabble in the lore in the books, which are published by the Black Library. I did play Kill Team for a little bit back when it got reintroduced, like, oh good grief, that was a long time ago now. That was pre-pandemic. I'm old. So yeah, I had fun with that, but I know for most Warhammer people, the pandemic was a time to paint all their armies. I got rather sick during the pandemic with everything but COVID, and it was not the fun, I'm home, so I'm going to do things anyway kind of sick. It was the, I feel terrible, so I'm just going to lay in bed all day kind of sick for like 3 months. So I have a pile of shame dating from back then of both of some 40k stuff, some Warhammer Age of Sigmar stuff, and actually quite a bit of BattleTech stuff. So yeah, I'm more of the, I like the setting, I like the books. Well, should say some of the books, because there's a lot of books. But Gary, you are much more into the Warhammer scene.
Yeah, so I have been collecting Warhammer since, I would say, I don't know, it's been a while.
You tried to get me into it many, many moons ago.
Yeah.
One of the first tax returns I ever got, I used to buy an Eldar box set because you wanted me to. And I caved to peer pressure.
So it is a little side passion of mine. It's not it probably wouldn't be surprising to people
a little side passion. How many armies do you actively have? Is it 3?
Okay, that I currently actively collect is, okay, that's from, we got,
because I know
Circles, Tyranids, World Eaters. That's 4 right now. 4.
Oh, okay. I was gonna say 3 because, well back in my day, there were the Guard.
So the Guard, right? The Guard, Genestealer Cults, Tyranids.
That was the other one.
Genestealer Cults are kind of like a halfway between Tyranids and Guard, so that's kind of like a bridge between the two of them. And then recently, for sanity's sake, I decided to pick up an army that was a little bit simpler, and so I picked up World Eaters. And
simpler in the sense of simpler to like paint, or just like not as like...
Well, it's simpler to paint and it's simpler to play, because where other armies have multiple ways of trying to win, and sometimes your models are smaller and weaker and whatnot to play on the tabletop. World Eaters are each individual one. They're Chaos Space Marines. They are tanks. Each one of them is a tank in and of himself. And there's really not much more stratagem than run towards the enemy screaming, and if you get to them, they'll be dead, but if you But if they have a decent amount of shooting and they can back up fast enough while doing said shooting, then you're probably screwed. But that's okay. I play my strategy, you play your strategy, and hopefully one of us wins.
Yeah, back when I played Kill Team, and I suppose I should probably explain that like difference between Kill Team and like the main Warhammer game is that Kill Team is much smaller scale.
Like 10 models as opposed to 50 plus models each or something like that.
So back in my day, like I said, back in my day, I still probably still have them somewhere of the Eldar stuff I bought way back then. And then I think I bought some orc stuff, so I dabbled in two very different armies. And I think if I had gone full blown, I would have stuck with the orcs for much the same reason. I've heard it said, I don't know if this is your how well this meme translates into how well it translates into reality, but I've heard it said that you fairly rarely come across a salty orc player.
Oh yeah, no, you don't survive long if you're a salty orc player. You just you give up too easily. They're just joyful if there's a scrap. That's how orc players are.
Yeah.
So let's get this into context of the thing. Let me talk a little bit about one of my armies.
Okay.
And BJ, you might actually recognize this. It was kind of intentional with this, but also kind of not.
So prior to going real deep, I'm gonna throw out a little bit of a disclaimer here, I guess.
Yes.
So I assume that we are not gonna go like super deep into like the lore and explain of what's going on in Warhammer, right? Because there are literally dozens, if not hundreds, of podcasts and YouTube episodes that are where that's like their shtick, right? It is Warhammer expert explains Warhammer to person who knows nothing about Warhammer, right?
There's many out there that do that and do it better than we could even possibly try.
Yeah.
So if you want your intro to Warhammer, please go find one of those or find someone close to you who knows Warhammer and ask them about it. And be prepared, sit down, be comfortable, have a drink before they start talking, because this is going to take a while.
I'm not sure who this episode is for, like, other than me and Gary. Because I'm pretty sure most of our regular listeners are like, what the flying heck is a Warhammer?
Yes, and why are there 40,000 of them?
Why is there 40,000? Like, I think the only one who might have a clue is your wife, and that's because she lives with you. So
yes.
So I assume she knows at least some Warhammer, at least by osmosis.
She's got a bit. She actually at one point spent one of my work bonuses on army for her, which is sitting pretty much in the same state as most of your models, BJ.
So like, funnily enough, there was a point where I say we, but you and I had made the pledge that if he made the plunge, I would also make the plunge, that like you almost got Jeff to try Warhammer and like his wife was on board for some reason.
But he I think he chickened out mainly because I was a little too honest with him about it, about how much it would take to get into, because it looks cool, but to make your army look as cool as most of these other people do, most of the people who play it for a long time do, it takes a lot to get it to that point.
It is a multi-pronged hobby. You do have to you put the models together, you paint the models. I think that was probably part reason why I kind of bounced off it back in the day, is I had this sort of mindset of, oh well, I'm just going to paint these models really fast, and that's not really what your train of thought should be when you paint these, because painting's supposed to be part of the fun, not like a chore, right?
Right. So All right, but let me tell you a little bit of story about this. And this, you're going to very quickly, BJ, pick up where I'm going with this. So I picked up this new army recently, the World Eaters, right? And I told you a bit about them. They run screaming at you. So it's a very simple play style. And I decided I'm going to go with a very simple color scheme. Other people, the painting in and of itself, BJ, actually gets almost as deep as the lore. I don't know if you knew this. Not quite that deep, but it gets deep. Like the sheer amount of styles and concepts that can go with painting gets really intricate, right? So what I did was I took my World Eaters, which you can imagine they're Space Marines, which if anybody just go look up Warhammer Space Marine and you'll pick it up, right? So imagine a Warhammer Space Marine.
Some blue guy.
Imagine a Warhammer Space Marine, but instead of like the proud looking blue guy, he's a red guy with spikes all over him. Except mine aren't red. I put a regular base coat of black, which is, basic rattle can, spray can of black spray paint, except it's like a special one that doesn't screw up your model. I took basic spray coat of black, and then I did a series of aggressive dry brushes. And dry brushing is where you take your paint, you get some paint on your paintbrush, and then you kind of dry that off on like a little paper towel or whatever till basically it's almost completely dry, and you have just the barest amount of paint left on your brush. And then I took that and I brushed that across my model. And so what that does is it leaves little highlights across your entire model of the color. And I took that from a dark gray coming up to almost a white. And the dry brushes went less and less aggressive as I got lighter in the scale. So basically you had grays going into whites across my entire model, with the very deep recesses being completely black. And then I did blood spatters across the entire model. So you might, BJ, you might be thinking to yourself, wait a minute, this now ties into something, doesn't it? Right?
Nope, I'm not picking up what you're putting down.
So my models look like they're black and white with red sprays all across them.
Okay. Yeah, you're okay. Yeah,
now you
guess you're tying it back into the show we talked about / reviewed, which I guess we're probably not really going to talk about here.
So, I put it, or I didn't really think about that per se, because I've seen other movies and shows where they do this.
Yeah. What's it called? Hell's Reich or something like that?
Yeah. There's also, like for instance,
comic book movie.
No, there's
Sin City?
What's the movie called? It's an old one, and it's not science fiction at all. It's World War II, Schindler's List.
Yes, a great movie to base a Warhammer army scheme on.
But Schindler's List actually chose, because they had the capability at that point to do a color movie, but they went with black and white for artistic reasons, right?
Yes,
and then there was occasional splashes of color just for, to draw your attention to specific elements.
Yes, I should say I have not seen Schindler's List in its entirety, because
long and depressing.
Yeah, some people watch movies to just have fun. I'm one of those people, so.
So this, and there's other representations out across the world, and I had the idea of making my guys be black and white, and then in a world full of models that have color all over them. Mine are black and white with splashes of red, right? So, and then this show comes along, and before I started painting my army, I kind of knew this show existed, but it didn't really click with me. I didn't really.
The show or released a video on YouTube came out in 2022, I believe, and your Chaos Army is a little more recent than that, I believe.
Yeah, a little bit more recent than that. I think I picked it up late 2023 is when I started this. But so I knew of its existence, but it didn't really click with me until very, very recently that I was like, oh my goodness, I'm painting the Chaos version of this show. But I guess that's okay, right? So,
yeah.
So let me go a little bit more into let's move a little bit more into what the Warhammer Plus has to offer. There's this show, what we
not
watched
sponsored
there.
By the way.
Not sponsored, not at all. No. There's this show, and then there's a whole slew of other animations. And there's a very long list, like now hours and hours and hours, of a series called Warhammer Lore Masters, where they go into little snippets of lore that you can watch, and then they also have battle reports, basically stuff that's already kind of a reflection of what's already available for free on YouTube, but this time done by Games Workshop themselves.
So for those who don't know, a battle report is basically a game of Warhammer that has been played on camera.
There's many studios out there that do battle reports, and Games Workshop doesn't go after them because it's free advertising for them. So
Games Workshop I have noticed, they have a bit of a cycle when it comes to their customer customer relations, I guess I should say.
And how litigious they want to be. Yes.
Yeah, they tend to build themselves up to where there's pretty high goodwill, and then they spoil it by aggressively protecting their IP to be judicious about it, I guess.
And I'm sure there's things happening behind the scenes that cause them to do that. But from a fan's point of view, sometimes it kills things that everybody really just loves. And that's kind of sad. And other times,
like the most recent one, it backfired so hard it kind of brought about the BattleTech renaissance.
Yeah,
because
they went after one of the most beloved series.
Well,
now, admittedly,
they didn't go after it per se, but I assume you're talking about text-to-speech device, correct?
Yes, text-to-speech.
So they didn't go after that per se, but they did go after other things with enough gusto that the person who made text-to-speech device decided it would be safer to stop doing so.
Yeah. So most of that was happening around the same time as Warhammer Plus itself was launching, right? There was also some other things that were happening that are rumored to have been happening behind the scenes, but I don't want to get into rumors because we'll just be talking about that stuff for hours.
Yeah, no. As with most fandoms, there is, or how to phrase this kindly, negative news generates way more clicks than positive news. So Warhammer is a niche hobby, but it is a very deep niche.
Yeah.
Niche.
So and it's verging on mainstream, right? It's just one or two lucky breaks and they could be into mainstream. So but I'm not going to go into that. What I am going to go into is what they have available, right? So we have this episode that we had for review, Angels of Death Origins Kill Command. They have the Angels of Death entire series, which is all pretty much that way. BJ, if you want to get a sampling of what at least one of the other series on this thing is before you go into it, you could watch some of the animated trailers, specifically the one for Pariah Nexus that came out a few years ago.
Yeah, I was gonna say I've seen some clips about that one. I kind of looked into that a little bit because
that animation studio is much better than this one. Yeah. I'll give you that.
Yeah, and plus I'm more of a Salamanders guy than a Blood Angels guy.
And the salamander in that one. So for those who don't know,
I like my goody two-shoe Space Marines as compared to my not vampire Space Marines.
So Space Marines come in many flavors. Space Marines being the main protagonists of the Warhammer 40k series or Warhammer 40k setting, and also main antagonists because Space Marines aren't all good guys, but there's many flavors of Space Marines. Two of them that are represented in these series, Angels of Death, represent Blood Angels, which are basically kind of space vampires, kind of sort of. It's up to interpretation. But there's also Salamanders, which is in the Pariah Nexus, who are basically just big old friendly Space Marines, except for other groups. But we won't get into that. Yeah, unless you're an alien. If you're a human, then seeing a salamander is probably your best bet for happiness, or at least survival. Because that guy's going to... You're going to survive. He might die, but you will survive.
Yeah, I would say salamanders and lamenters, but if you see a lamenter, something bad's about to happen.
Not because of the lamenter.
No.
But,
no, just bad things happen to the poor lamenters.
Fun fact, lamenters come from the same G seed as Blood Angels, but yeah. Anyways.
That's probably cut too deep.
But there's other ones that are more, there's other series that are more cartoony that they have available to watch. Trying to think. Hammer and Bolter. They also have one that's animated, kind of like a stripped down animation style. It's very, how to explain it? It's a stripped down animation where it's like they're in a hive, and it's kind of a noir, but I like it because it focuses a lot more on just the regular ins and outs of a normal hive city as opposed to the big hero stuff that happens in 40k, but that's neither here nor there. But yeah, no. So yeah, Warhammer, it's a huge setting, and these shows are just kind of like peeks into it that you can't get unless you like really deep dive into the books or the games or whatever. So if you want the short form, you can just watch these shows, and you kind of get quite a bit from it.
So we kind of hinted at it during the review, but if you had to pick, say, 1 to 3 pieces of media, be it a book or a TV show or maybe even the game itself, if someone was interested in Warhammer, how would you recommend they go about deciding if it's for them? Because I suppose we should say at some point, if it was not blatantly obvious, Warhammer is not for everyone. It is probably one of the prime progenitors of the term grim dark.
Mm-hmm. So, okay. Let me... All right. So the first one, I'm going to recommend these in order of kind of availability. The last one I'm going to recommend probably going to have to pay for, but it's probably the best dive into it that you could probably get for at least from just putting yourself into this place. The first one I'm probably going to recommend, if you can still find a copy of it, would probably be, it's called Astartes. Have you watched that one, BJ?
Yes, I think that was another reason why people got mad at Games Workshop, is because they hired the guy that made Astartes, so Astartes got taken off of YouTube because it became a Warhammer Plus property.
It became a Warhammer Plus a property, and the reaction was kind of mixed with that one. Some people liked it, some people didn't. They liked the fact that the guy wasn't sued, but they didn't like the fact that all of his stuff got taken off. Now, you can still kind of, maybe, if you know where to look, find, I don't know, like an old reaction to Astartes or something like that, where the person doesn't do a lot of reacting, or something along those lines. Because Astartes was, in all ways to say it, it was amazing, right? A passion project by a fan.
Yeah, so I was gonna say, I guess you should say that Astartes was like, what, maybe 20 minutes all told across like 5 episodes of a fan animation.
Yes. Just probably some of the best and it even puts to shame some Hollywood studios, right?
Yeah, but it should also be noted that there was one guy, but it took like what, about 6 months per episode, more than sometimes. So
yeah, he was working by himself, and it's like I said, it was a passion project.
Yeah.
So Astartes would be one. If you can find a copy of it to watch, you can still kind of, because it originated on YouTube, and the internet is forever, right?
Mm-hmm.
You can probably still find some version of it out there that's not in, and even I think Warhammer, you can even look on the Warhammer or Games Workshop's website, and if you look through enough, if you look into enough corners of it, you can find Astartes for free on there. I remember at one point they hosted that particular video, all of them, the master cut together for free on their website. So if you just go looking long enough, you're going to find a free copy of it somewhere. So that's number one. Angels of Death Origins, or any of the stuff on the main channel, like they've got trailers and whatnot on there. Each season of Warhammer 40K and also Warhammer Age of Sigmar has its own trailer. And then there's this episode that we watched, and then there's trailers for other significant projects that they have in their animation side. You can go for that. Now the third one I'm going to recommend, I can't remember the name. There's a short story. I'm gonna pause things for a second. BJ, can we pause this for a second while I go and ask my wife a question?
Sure.
Okay, we're officially pausing it right now.
I think about it, I will throw in a musical interlude here.
Unpause.
Okay.
The third one that I'm going to recommend, probably go onto Audible. And get this one, it's a short story, so it shouldn't cost too much. It's called The Watcher in the Rain. It's
I
a
know that. Yeah.
yeah, it's a short story. It's a horror story, right? So be ready for that.
Yeah, it's presented as more of a play than like a traditional story reading.
So these three things, none of them are particularly long, and so you're not going to be investing a lot of time. And none of them, like two of them, are you can probably find for free, and the third one shouldn't cost too much. So you're not putting in a lot of money either before you decide whether or not you like it. But these three things are probably the best you're going to get that fit those two criteria, right? I don't want to tell people to go and watch something that takes 5 hours or spend $1 million on something before they decide whether or not they like it, something, right? So if you want to dip your toe into something, cheap and the things I think, I respect our audience. I don't want to waste their time or their money before they, decide whether or not they want to get into something like this.
So, yeah. So as someone who comes more at it from the book end, I thought about this for a little bit, and I would say that if you think you might like it, I would suggest the Eisenhorn books by Dan Abnett.
Definitely,
Abnett.
that would be your
The
next step. In all honesty,
yeah, the first one being Xenos, and I would recommend those because they don't dive super into the deep end. At least the first one doesn't, and I would argue that they're a good sci-fi book and not just a Warhammer book, right? Like there's books that are like, oh, I'm a Warhammer book, right?
yeah, and sometimes they're good. They're good Warhammer books, but much like Godzilla -1, uh, Eisenhorn is a good sci-fi book that happens to be a Warhammer,
Yeah,
right?
and again, to specify, we keep calling it the Eisenhorn book, but the first one is Xenos, Xenos.
Yes. So if you're gonna, I would recommend you start with my suggestions, and then if you want to go deeper, buy Xenos, read that. If you like it, go from there.
Yeah. Lot. Well, I don't know what the feeling is nowadays, but back in my day when I first started to stick my toe in Warhammer, a lot of people recommended Gaunt's Ghosts, and I like Gaunt's Ghosts, but they're pretty one-note books, to be entirely
Yeah,
honest.
that they kind of sit within, especially these days. There's they lean very heavily on the military science fiction, right?
Yeah.
There's other ones, especially they've started an entire noir series, crime noir series, where they do nothing but um, just like basically almost like detectives in hive cities or stuff like that.
Well, it seems like they've, how the phrase, they've kind of tried the genre it out because they did have the Warhammer Horror Initiative a little while ago, which was both, which I guess was both Warhammers, uh,
Yeah,
Age of Sigmar and 40K.
yeah,
So, and I guess I guess to just give sort of a passing explanation, Age of Sigmar is a fantasy setting and 40K is a sci-fi setting.
yeah.
That's
Um,
that's the big difference between the two.
and where Warhammer 40K is kind of, if you stretch your imagination, is kind of set in our universe in that there is an Earth and humans come from it. Kind of set in our universe right now, but just 40,000 years in the future, versus Warhammer Age of Sigmar is set in a completely different universe that has nothing to do with Warhammer 40K apart from the name Warhammer.
Is
And
this when we make the joke that if we want to watch a Warhammer a 40K movie that you should watch Event Horizon.
I mean, I guess you could. Now, this is where I'm going to talk about something that's kind of controversial amongst Warhammer 40K, in the fact that it is very derivative. It's actually questionable, very much questionable, as to, it's one of those questions of who came first, the chicken or the egg? Which one came first, Chaos or Event Horizon? Because there's questions of who was inspired by whom in the making of that movie, and also the making of certain segments of Warhammer, right?
Oh, I mean, it also could have been just what's it called? Sort of parallel storytelling.
It could have been that too.
Just, just a couple of people happen to come up with a very similar idea around the same time. It's like back years and years ago when there's like 5 volcano movies that all came out the same summer or whatever.
But one thing that definitely did come first was the book Dune, right? And
It all comes back to Dune. I need to pull a Jeff and find a place to make a Star Trek reference.
But Dune came. Dune definitely came first, and there's a lot of other science fiction elements that came first as well. The concept of power armor came a long time ago. One of the biggest novels that made it into the mainstream of science fiction was Starship Troopers, right? So you get Dune, you get Starship Troopers, you get a whole bunch of other science fiction stories.
Are you ready for a quick hard tangent?
Go for it.
I heard, I guess it was a couple months ago, there was talk that they're going to make another Starship Troopers movie, which led to the discussion that you would think it would online, where you have the people who only know Starship Troopers is the movie, and the people who preferred the book.
Yeah.
I'm like, look, I know there is never, or I shouldn't say never, but the likelihood of a movie being, what's the word? Being faithful to the book is extremely unlikely, because I don't know if Starship Troopers as written would make for a blockbuster Hollywood movie, but at the very least, can we have power armor? For decades, I've been mystified of how you make a Starship Troopers movie, and like, you know what? No power armor.
Yeah, I don't get that one either.
I'm
yeah, when you said that, you
tempted
probably could have just heard my eyes rolling in my head.
Yeah, I am
like, oh gosh.
I am continually tempted. I will probably never pull this trigger, but I am continually tempted to make us watch the Starship Troopers movie, just so me and you can go off on that tangent, and Jeff will.
Oh, I don't know if I'm ready for that one, BJ.
I mean, like I said, it's probably a trigger I'm never going to pull, but it's one I think about every so often.
So,
anyway,
getting back. So you got now Warhammer 40K. Obviously has these elements, right? And people have said that it's basically stealing from all this other stuff. And I'm not going to try to defend that. I'm going to sit here and I'm going to say that yes, it is stealing from all these different sources. But there's a difference. It's never quite crossed into the territory of plagiarism, right? Because plagiarism is where you steal from one group and you definitely don't cite your sources. Not that Games Workshop is ever going to cite their sources, right? As in, they're never going to say, we made this, these parts are based off of this, or those parts are based off of that. They're very derivative, but since they're derivative of so many different sources, one could make the argument that what they're actually doing is synthesizing. This is a term in literary.
Yeah, I was gonna say I feel like we've had this discussion before, but I forget what episode it was, or it might have been off air. I forget.
They are synthesizing a new thing by pulling from so many different sources, right? Since there's a little bit of Tolkien in there because the orcs in Warhammer 40k are orcs and elves in Warhammer 40k are based off Tolkien's works, right? Except it's set in space, right?
Well,
it's definitely not something that showed up in Dune.
And one spelled with a K and one spelled with a C. Very important.
Yeah. So we've got orcs and elves in space. We also have Tyranids, which hive mind creatures, very much a la Starship Troopers, being fought by power armored super soldiers. Still, yet again, Starship Troopers.
I mean, well, speaking of Tyranids, you want stuff that's inspired by here's looking at you, Zerg from StarCraft.
Yeah, the art direction, like they had one art direction previous to StarCraft, and then they completely went a different art direction for the Tyranids after StarCraft. So, yeah. We'll just put that on the table. But like I say, synthesis, BJ, synthesis. They're pulling from so many different sources, and they're mashing them all together in such a way that is appealing and good to so many different people. And then just like kind of letting people, there's like you talked about, there's books, right? Black Library is actually the publishing arm of Games Workshop. It's actually just one of their companies, right? And they've got so many authors writing for them. And those authors are held in check, at least in the more recent Warhammer 40k books. They're being held in fairly good check, being told that they can only write about, they're being controlled fairly well about what they can and can't write about in their books. And so it makes for a very good setting that they're allowed to that is being developed there, right? So yeah, it's a synthesis as opposed to outright plagiarism and yes, there's a lot of theft going on, but it's theft from so many different locations that it makes for something beautiful.
It's not theft, it's inspiration.
Inspiration, yeah.
Yeah. No, there's probably some poor sap at Games Workshop and whose job is probably be the continuity editor. So
yeah. They call it the lore master, but yeah, it's the guy who has to keep track of everything.
It's like, no, you can't say that in this book.
Well, here's the thing. Here's the cool thing about it. Warhammer 40k is also Warhammer Age of Sigmar to a certain extent. Both of those are universes in which time travel technically exists. Technically, it's not reliable at all, right? But it technically exists. So if characters being in wrong spots or being in certain areas, doing certain things is wrong, then they can just kind of hand wave it away as saying, "Oh, that's either
Spring the warp."
Yeah. The warp caused weird things to happen, and also most famously, one particular character, his name is Caiaphas Cain, which is a very amusing series. It's actually a comedic series, which is kind of interesting, this being a grim, dark setting, how comedy fits in there. No, but it does. It works. But Caiaphas Cain is a character most famous for multiple times during his career having been buried with full military honors only to show up a couple of weeks later saying, "No, I'm still alive." Um, and also, this happens. This has happened so many times that the people who are in charge of the armies of the Imperium of Mankind have now declared it illegal to have him be declared fully dead, because he just keeps showing up after, people have said that he's dead. So yeah, it's kind of funny like that. Um, so
I
you
was, I was kind of expecting you to, because maybe it was a while ago, but I want to say a while ago, I think in one of our attempts to get Jeff in the 40K, you kind of suggested, you kind of suggested the Kane series books. I was getting ready to push back on you because I don't know if Kane is I don't know if you get the joke if you're not familiar with the universe.
um and that's another one. From what I understand, it's also another one that's kind of derivative of other another series. I've heard that there's like an English series of stuff that's kind of along the same lines as Caiaphas Kane, but I don't know. I'm not from England. I don't know. I'm
Well,
not
I
from
mean,
as
I can think
familiar
of
with.
like, well, I mean, like off the top of my head, I can think of like two or three different comedic things set in like a grim, dark military setting, like say World War II or whatever. So, so it's not terribly unique. So it's inspired by, not stealing from.
Yes, yes, inspired by, and it's inspired by so many different sources that one could say it's almost become its own unique thing. And definitely you can say the origins are inspired by, with heavy amounts of sarcasm. The end result is definitely its own thing, right? Is evolved over the now many decades of its existence into something that's wholly and completely unique. So we have I don't know I don't know where to go from here without taking too much more of a deep dives, and I don't want to do that to our listeners. Right? We've already described where they can, kind of dip their toes in if they want to.
No,
Um,
like I said at the very beginning, I'm not sure who this episode is for, other than just have an episode while Jeff's not here.
eh,
What?
it's maybe someone will hear this and be like, oh, maybe I should go and give this a try.
One these days, I'm going to take an episode off, and I'm just to see what you and Jeff do. Knowing you guys, you'd probably wouldn't have an episode. It's like knowing Jeff, he's just, oh, BJ's not here. We don't need an episode. We'll just skip a week.
No, if Jeff made us do this, I think you guys can. I think you can do this to Jeff, and I will force him to actually get on there, and we'll end up talking probably about another Star Trek thing.
You'll go to his house. It's like, Jeff returns. He's like, no. Oh.
But anyways, that's kind of where I want to wrap things up on this particular discussion. Like I said,
Okay.
I don't know where else to go from here without starting to do some major deep dives, which I don't really want to do, because it's just gonna, it would take forever, and I don't want to completely bore what's left of our audience into just quitting. Anyways.
Well, if I may ask in passing, because
Okay.
I often don't get to talk to you unless it's on the podcast. So I know recently you went out of state to participate in a Warhammer tournament. Did you take your world leaders?
Yes, I did.
Did you have fun?
I had fun.
Did you win any games?
I won 2 out of the 5 games I played.
Hey, there you go.
So, as I tell people at the hobby shops, because I often go on what I call my man night. I go off to a hobby shop and I do hobby stuff for a while. And as I often tell the people who I encounter there, that I have gone and played badly in many tournaments.
Yeah, I think I think that was my idea years ago. I started getting Warhammer. I bought some Battletech stuff, just kind of practice paint miniatures on, and the idea was, I'll do this and I'll go out, I'll meet people, and I'll have friends outside Jeff and Gary.
Yeah.
Then the pandemic happened, and my and then since that long illness I mentioned, my energy levels have not been great, so I tend to go home and just lounge about after work. So maybe at some point I will attempt to go out and make friends in hobby shops again. But like at this point, I have way more BattleTech stuff than Warhammer stuff, and it's much harder to find a place to play BattleTech than Warhammer.
Actually, there's a hobby shop that's closer to me that they would definitely love you there. But like I said, that's closer to me. So
I was gonna say you live a fair distance away.
Yeah. I don't think you want to do an hour drive just to get to a hobby shop that might have something to do with BattleTech.
Not with my current car, no.
But yeah, no, it's so from a gameplay perspective, Warhammer is your. So I encountered a person recently who he was kind of interested at my models. He saw them and he's like, "What's that?" And I showed him a few of my models, and then he's like, "Oh, this is a lot of effort." And then I told him about Warhammer 40K, and he was intrigued by the idea. And so that's what I'm going to leave this kind of my final monologue, right? He was kind of intrigued by the idea of it's not just a hobby where you put models together and paint them, right? It's a hobby where you put models together, you paint them, and then they have a purpose after that, right? So you can put all this energy into making something beautiful, and then it gets admired not just by you or family and friends, but by anybody who you encounter in your who you play against, right? And that kind of spoke to him. He's never going to play the game, but he was kind of vaguely interested in that as a concept. And so that's what I'm going to leave the audience with. If that's something that intrigues you, then I suggest you look into it further. But, if it doesn't, then, just kind of chalk this episode up to as a side thing.
At the very least Warhammer is I think it's, shall we say, and as one of these people, and actually worse than one of these people, since I am quite introverted, it takes people who may not usually go out and socialize and gives them reason to go out and socialize, at the very least, right? You got the aspect of sitting at home in your basement painting your miniatures, and then if you want, you can go out and meet people and play a game. I think that might be why Jeff's wife was on board, was more for the social aspect, I suspect, but because I'm bad, but Jeff's worse. I gotta make fun of Jeff even when he's not here.
Yeah, I don't know how I'm the one who's the most sociable. I wouldn't have called that on my bingo card, but hey, life is life, right?
Yeah, I fully intend to make the effort at some point, but again, I've been fully intending to make the effort at some point for like 5 years now, so there you go.
Anyways, so yeah,
Anyway, on that happy-go-lucky note,
Warhammer 40K special with no Jeff.
No Jeff. Is it really? I was editing the Superman episode before this. It's like, is it really? I don't know if it's really an episode of Wandering Tangent podcast without Jeff here very confidently proclaiming his headcanon as fact. On one hand, I feel bad about making fun of Jeff when he's not here. On the other hand, it's always fun to make fun of Jeff. I think if I went through the entire episode without making fun of Jeff, he would kind of feel forgotten. So, hi, Jeff.
Hi.
Hi. You probably would listen to this, but you're going to have to at least listen to part of it to make the video. So, hi, Jeff. Anyway. So, yeah, that was us talking Warhammer via the excuse of Warhammer 40,000 Angel of Death Origins Kill Command. That is a heck of a title. Anyway, I am BJ. With me was Gary. Jeff will join us again next week as we talk about something. Bye.